Hey folks, I'm WWE Hall of Famer Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and if you want to find out some of my ideas and what I think about pro wrestling, check out Great North Wrestling. Tough guy, ho!
So I'll just get right into it. When you were in high school, you won the New York State Wrestling Championships. You want to just tell us about that?
Well, thanks, brother, but you know the first thing Hacksaw's got to do is give a big ho! Kind of fires me up, gets me going. But yeah, I actually had a nice high school career in Glens Falls High up in upstate New York, where I won the New York State Amateur Wrestling Championship my senior year. I was undefeated, and actually the guy that I beat from Tonawanda went on to win the Pan Am Games that year. My shot put record still stands from 1973, and football was my main sport, so I had a nice high school career.
Where did you play football in college?
I played my college football for Southern Methodist University down in Dallas, Texas, and that actually worked out really well because that's where I met Fritz von Erich and opened the door to wrestling.
And before you went into wrestling, you had a little bit of a pro football career. Do you want to just tell us about that?
Sure, yeah. That's my main drive when I was a young guy, was to play pro football, you know. And after my 4 years at SMU, I went to the Atlanta Falcons. I got hurt during my first season, had 2 knee surgeries. My second year pro ball, I went up to the Toronto Argonauts and played a short time for the Argos when Forrest Gregg was the head coach, and enjoyed football quite a bit, but I knew I had no long-term future in football, so I made the move to professional wrestling.
So you already had contacts with Fritz von Erich through your college days?
Yeah, just on a fluke meeting, you know, he came up to me and said, "Kid, you might want to think about wrestling." And I was like, I think I'll be playing football for a while. But yeah, I called Fritz back up when I realized there was no future in football for me, and he brought me down to the Sportatorium. Gary Hart gave me my first pair of trunks, and I worked with Gino Hernandez quite a bit, and that's where I broke into the business.
So was it Fritz that trained you or hooked you up with the training? Or?
Well, Fritz kind of hooked me up with a trainer. We would always go down to the Sportatorium. David Manning was the referee, and of course the Von Erich boys were down there, and I would learn how to hit the ropes and take a bump, and it was just very basic moves. And as a young guy, you always bring your gear with you. And one night I was at a show, somebody didn't make it. And they're like, "Kid, you got your gear?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I sure do." So they went out and grabbed me, and they put me in a tag match, and I was off and running.
And you mentioned Gino Hernandez. Did you get along well with him?
I got along great with Gino Hernandez. A lot of folks had trouble with the guy. You know, he was gorgeous Gino Hernandez. I mean, he was a real handsome young guy. He had all the women, made a lot of money, so a lot of folks were jealous. And he was a little abrasive, but I actually got along with Gino, and he helped me out quite a bit in the early days.
And some people have speculated because of the way he died, the cocaine overdose was found in his stomach. They speculated some foul play was involved. What do you think about that?
Well, Gino, towards the end, he really got heavy into drugs. He was shooting drugs in his body, so, you know, he started hanging around with some shady people. So you never know, but he was taking a lot of drugs.
So you ended up working for The Rock's grandfather, Peter Maivia, in Hawaii. How did that come about?
Well, you know, after a short time with down there in Texas with Fritz, I went up to New York, where I'm from, and my dad knew Arnie Skolin, who was in the WWF, and they brought me down to a show, and you know, I was a relatively big guy back then, and they did jobs for Angelo Mosca, Ken Patera, Sergeant Slaughter, and they kind of took a liking to me. They said, "Kid, you might have a future, but come up with something better than Big Jim, and we're going to send you out to learn how to wrestle." And I'm thinking, where are they going to? They ended up sending me to Hawaii, where I went out and worked with the High Chief Peter Maivia, and met one of my best friends of my life, Ming Haku, and it was a great time. Even though we were making about $25-30 a week, you know, all the guys lived together. It was a fun time in the business.
Everyone always talks about Haku's toughness. Do you have any stories regarding that?
Well, you know, any of the island guys, I tell you, were just a tough group of people. I mean, Haku, Snuka, the Samoans. I mean, but Haku was probably well known as one of the tougher guys in our business, and he was a jerk magnet. He walked into a bar, and every guy would come up and mess with Haku, but yeah, it ended up he bit a tip of a guy's nose off in a fight that the guy started, but the guy sued him and really hurt Ming bad. So a guy like Ming, or any of us actually, it's hard sometimes to go out, because if you meet 100 people, 99 are cool, but there's one guy, you want to arm wrestle me? You look bigger on TV, so sometimes it's hard to go out without security.
And you brought up Jimmy Snuka. What do you think of this whole, the murder charge coming back now so many years later?
Well, I tell you, if, I know Jimmy, I've heard rumors of that story. I don't really know the whole situation, but I'm sure that the girl's family's been pursuing it for quite a while. I know they won a civil lawsuit, so there's that much smoke. There must be a little fire, I think.
And while you were in Hawaii, did you ever meet the young Rock?
Yes, I met the young Rock a couple of times. Of course, I wrestled, that's my whole joke. I wrestled the Rock's grandfather, I wrestled the Rock's father, and I may get the Rock. Not a chance in hell, but I met the Rock, and the Rock is a stand-up guy. Just recently at WrestleMania, I was down in the bowels of the building with my wife and daughter. We were walking through, and they were running the Rock from one interview to another. He's like, "Hey, Hacksaw," and they're like, "Come on, Rock, we gotta go." He goes, "Wait, I want to go say hello to Hacksaw and his family." So that's something I'll always remember. Of course, my daughters were really excited to meet the Rock.
Do you think it's a pretty good thing to have him part of the business now that he's a big movie star?
Yeah, because I think The Rock really loves the business. He grew up in the business. He understands the business, and I think he loves the business in his heart. So even though he's got all the money in the world, a big, huge international movie star, I still think we'll see him around wrestling quite a bit.
And while we're talking about movie stars, I heard a rumor that you and Mickey Rourke had a little altercation. Is that true?
Yeah, back when we had WrestleMania in Houston, the movie The Wrestler just came out, and Mickey was going to wrestle Chris Jericho, I believe. And the night before the show, we were in the hotel, and I went up to check on my daughters in the hotel, and I was coming back down the hallway. And of course, I didn't have my glasses on. I was drinking maybe a little bit, and I see these three guys walking towards me, and two of the guys moved to one side. I moved to one side. The one guy kind of goes by, and we just brush shoulders in passing. And me being me, I'm like, "Hey, you got enough room there, brother?" And the guy spins around. He goes, "What you say to me?" So I'm trying to focus in on the guy. I'm like, "Who the hell is this?" Because I know it's got to be WWE people. And I'm like, "Oh shit, it's that Mickey Rourke guy." And I'm like, "Well, I said, you got enough room there, buddy?" He goes, "Nobody talks to me that way." I said, "Well, stand up when you're talking to me," because he's about this big, So now we square off a little bit in his handlers with Chris Shamrock's younger brother and another Ultimate Fighter guys. And of course, they could have pulled my arms off if they wanted, but they broke up the fight and everything, and it wasn't really a fight, it was an argument. And but by the time the next day at WrestleMania, it got blown so far out of proportion that me and Mickey had a knife fight in the hallway, But that night at the after party after WrestleMania, we were all in the big room party, and one of the WWE office guys come up. They said, "Hacksaw, if you see Mickey Rourke, say something to him." And I said, "Yeah, if I see him, it's a big party, I'll say something to him, kind of break it off." But about an hour later, the office guy comes over. He goes, "You're right, Hacksaw. That Mickey Rourke is a jerk."
What did you think of how they portrayed wrestlers in the movie The Wrestler as kind of pathetic? Like, it seemed to be a guy like you. Not that you were like that, but like they seem to portray older wrestlers like they're all pathetic individuals driving around.
Well, the train wrecks always sell. People like the horror stories about Scott Hall and my good buddy Jake Roberts, before he turned his life around. But, for me and other people, it's been a successful business. I've been with my wife for 32 years. Never had to go to rehab for booze or drugs, no felony arrest. It's been a good profession for me. And there's other guys that are successful in our business. Tito Santana, Roddy Piper, who just passed away, Mick Foley. There's guys that are successful in our business, but you don't ever hear about it. You always hear the horror stories.
And you worked for Georgia Championship Wrestling. You want to just give us your memories of that briefly?
Yeah, that was kind of a short little run because I came back from Hawaii, and I was the convict over in Hawaii, and I came back to Georgia, or came to Georgia Championship Wrestling, and I went back to Big Jim Duggan, and I still didn't understand the business a lot, but I started wrestling DiBiase, Ted DiBiase, and him being a second-generation wrestler, he taught me quite a bit, but it was really kind of a short run at Georgia.
Was Ole Anderson the booker at that time?
Well, when Ole came in, it was Buck Roby was there when I was there, and then when Ole and the NWA came in, I didn't get along with Ole, so that's when I left Georgia and went down to Pensacola Territory.
What was the issue with Ole?
Well, we just didn't get along, and I knew I got along with Buck Roby and the other guys that were leaving. Robert Fuller went down and he opened up the Pensacola, Florida territory, so I just went down with him, and it was good to sit smaller territory, but easier trips and more fun for a young guy.
At what point in time did you start using the Hacksaw name?
Well, that's after Pensacola. Buck Roby and Bruiser Brody, who I met in Georgia, they went to San Antonio, and they called me when I was down in Pensacola and like, hey, we got a great spot for you here in San Antonio. So that's when I made the move to San Antonio, and that's where I became Hacksaw. So out of 36 years, probably 33 I've been Hacksaw.
And I believe you mentioned last night on your comedy show, was it Brody that told you
to carry the 2x4? Yeah, because back in the old days it was a much rougher business. Just getting back and forth to the ring was very dangerous if you're a bad guy. The people spit at you and punch you and kick at you. Some guys got cut, some guys got maced. So it was a tough business. So I was sitting in the back all covered with bruises and loogies, and Brody came in. He says, Duggan, if you carry something to the ring, carry something you can use. Forget those feathered boas and sequin robes. And I looked down, there's a piece of wood. I picked that up, and I've been carrying it ever since.
So I assume you were friends with Brody?
I got along good with Brody. I wouldn't say we were close friends or anything, but he was a more established big-name star, and I was a jabroni young guy coming in. But he gave me my first break, and first time I ever wrestled main event was with Brody, and that opened up the door. The whole Hacksaw thing started with Bruiser.
What do you think about what happened to him and that the murderer completely got away with it?
Yeah, that was it's one of the horror stories in wrestling for Brody to get stabbed to death in Puerto Rico. There's 10 different stories that come out of that, what happened, but bottom line is nobody should lose their life over wrestling, and it was a shame for a great talent like that to be killed in the dressing room.
Did you hear anything that the company owed him money at the time?
Like I said, there's 10 different rumors, and Brody also was an intimidating guy. He was a big man, and he'd have that chain with him, and he was loud and boisterous. So, some people say, well, the other guy had to have a knife to protect himself. So there's two stories. Bottom line, that no one should lose their life over wrestling.
And one of your most popular areas that you've wrestled in is the Mid-South Wrestling Territory, where you wrestled for Bill Watts. What are your thoughts on Bill Watts? He's such a controversial character, but obviously you must have got along very well.
I got along good with Bill. Bill liked ex-athletes, Junkyard Dog, Steve Dr. Death Williams, guys that had athletic backgrounds. And, he liked tough guys. He liked the guys that fight. That's the old deal in Mid-South. If you lost a bar fight, you get fired. So it was a real rough territory, but also you learned the business because you'd wrestle 7 days a week, maybe 10 times in 7 days, always in front of an audience, so you'd learn how to work. But also you learn how to talk on the microphone. You would do interviews, and you wouldn't do just one generic interview. You do, in every individual city would be an interview. And if he didn't like it, he'd say, hey, do it again. And you'd have to do it over. And that's why I see so many WWE superstars or Hall of Famers came out of that Mid-South territory. It was a great proving ground. Did
he ever try and recruit you for WCW when he was in charge?
Nope. No, never really tried to recruit me. I talked to him when Turner got involved. That's when I started talking to WCW, but I was very happy up in WWF.
I heard a story from that territory that your brain almost got smashed by some type of bolt in a turnbuckle post.
Actually, that was in the Mid-South territory. Me and One Man Gang were wrestling. It was the North American tournament, I believe. And back in the old days where the ropes connected to the ring post, the bolt that connected the ropes, about that much of the bolt was sticking out of the post. Me and Gang were on the floor fighting. Neither one of us could see, and he ran my head into the post, and unbeknownst to us, the bolt was sticking out, and still have the indentation in my skull from it. That was a very serious injury.
And you kept wrestling later on that night?
Yes, I kept wrestling. I didn't realize how bad I was hurt, and and we were in separate dressing rooms, and I beat Gang, and I had to come back to wrestle Terry Gordy, one of my good friends, and Gordy was in the ring. We were in separate dressing rooms. He didn't know how bad I was hurt. I came out, and I'm out on my feet. I'm walking around the ring. The building is spinning. Big Terry reaches over the top rope, grabs me by the hair to pull me in the ring. It was like peeling a banana. My scalp went like that, and he's like, "Oh, geez," But a bad injury, but that's part of the business.
Did you ever wrestle the Junkyard Dog in that territory?
Oh yeah, wrestled Junkyard Dog a lot, man. And of course, Dog was a superhero down there in New Orleans. I mean, they do that "Who dat" chant, "Who dat, who dat, who dat gonna beat the dog, who dat," boom, boom, boom. And I tell you, you'd be back in the dressing room, the whole building be shaking with people chanting that. And Dog was over strong. And of course, me and Ted DiBiase and Matt Bourne were the Rat Pack back then.
And you mentioned Matt Bourne. There was some incident, obviously he passed away recently, but in a match on an independent show where apparently it turned into a little bit of a shoot. Is that true?
Yeah, well, Matt and I, we've had trouble 20 years ago, probably 30 years ago. We had a couple of fights in Mid-South, and I kind of worked him over a little bit back in the day. I was 300 pounds, but the way it was, we were in an independent show. Things kind of boiled over. Matt and I had trouble in the ring. I told the referee, told him, let's settle it in the dressing room, not in front of the people. And I went down in the dressing room, and I was waiting for him to come down the stairs, and he never came down the stairs. And I'm like, what in the world? Finally, the referee comes down, because I wasn't in at 50 plus back then, I wasn't in the shape to fight, but I wasn't afraid of Matt Bourne, that's for sure. And he never came downstairs, never came. Finally, the referee comes down. He said, hey, he went from the ring out the fire exit and in his car. He had already taken his bag, all his pictures and everything, and put in his car. So it looked like he was going to try to ambush me in the ring.
And speaking of fights, Dr. Death Steve William was known as a tough guy, and I heard that there was some big altercation at some windmill or something.
Oh, what was it called? Doc, like I said, the Mid-South Territory was a snake pit of tough guys, and Dr. Death Steve Williams was another one of my best friends, God bless him, is gone, and Hercules Hernandez, who was a buddy. We were all in the club, and anyway, a fight started by people throwing ice, and I was in on the ice throwing, I must admit. But anyway, but I was a babyface. The fans all talked Doc and Herc, and Doc was throwing punches like this, boom, 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 and Herc was a windmill going like that, and there was a 5-yard zone of dead and dying around him, because most people aren't used to fighting. And poor Doc and Herc, they got in their car, and every time they tried to leave, the people would put the boots to the car, so they'd get out and chase the people. Get in the car and put the boots to the car. Took them forever to get out of the parking lot. And of course, by the time they get out of the parking lot, the police are there, and they ended up arresting Doc and Herc. And the bad thing is, Doc, to his dying dead, said, Duggan, we didn't start throwing the ice, you did.
Now, when he did the Brawl for All, do you think he was just past his prime by that time, and also the rules of having boxing gloves on may have affected him? Yeah,
Doc was a boxer, and of course, Polshapek, the smoking gun to beat him, was a tough guy. Wrestling in general, it's a snake pit of tough guys. Guys are out there throwing punches, blocking punches, getting potatoed. I mean, it's a tough business, and I think on any day, anybody can beat anybody. They get that first punch in, and I think that was a whole bad idea to have boxing and wrestling. I don't know whose idea it was, but it definitely hurt Doc's career and hurt him physically. I think blew his knee out when he went down.
And there were huge shows at the Superdome from time to time at Mid-South. What kind of crowds were you guys getting on a general basis there?
Well, when we do the dome shows, that was we'd do maybe 1 or 2 domes a year, so we'd have 50,000 plus at the dome. I mean, we'd have some good shows, and we do our TV at the local boys club up in Shreveport. So it's amazing the appeal of wrestling down there in Mid-South.
So what made you jump to WWE from Mid-South? Because obviously we're probably making decent money in Mid-South at that time.
Yeah, especially after Junkyard Dog left. He went up for WrestleMania 1, so that elevated me to the top spot down in Mid-South. And then WrestleMania 2 came, and Jake went up for WrestleMania 2. But like I said, Jake and I are good friends. And he was like, hey, you need to get up here for WrestleMania 3. And I made the move because that obviously was going to be the company of the future.
And your first feud was with Nikolai Volkov. Do you have any memories of that?
Sure, of course. Anytime Nikolai would sing the Russian national anthem, I'd have a pair of bolt cutters, and I'd run down and I used to cut the microphone cord, which you can't do it nowadays because everything is cordless mics. But I remember Nikolai would be singing the national anthem, and I'd run down and I'd cut the cord on him. Nick was another tough man back in the day. I mean, he had a fight with Manny Fernandez in Mid-South. He knocked Manny out, and Manny couldn't fall down because every time Manny would go down, Nikolai would pick him up with an uppercut.
Were you there for the Butch Reed versus John Nord fight?
Yeah, I sure was. Yeah.
What happened with that?
I think that's when Bill Watts was kind of in a dark spot. And he stirred that pot, because he liked to see guys fight and stuff. And again, two tough men, Nord and Butch. And Nord got the first one in and closed Butch's eye, yeah.
And I heard that it ended with Butch trying to pick up this massive pipe that was kind of added some comedy to it because it was...
Too massive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was too massive. But, everybody was mad. Surprising there's not more fights in the dressing room. It's a very high pressure situation. You got 15 guys in a room made for 10 guys. You're getting dressed on top of each other. You've been on the road. You haven't eaten good. You haven't gotten much sleep. Surprisingly, there's not more altercations.
So you were getting a huge push when you first came to WWE, and then an incident occurred with the Iron Sheik. You want to just go into that?
Yeah. The worst thing about that whole arrest with me and the Iron Sheik is that folks think me and the Sheik are friends. And we're not friends. I gave the guy a ride one day, and long story short, I had some marijuana under my seat and we were drinking beers. And the trooper pulled us over, and it was in the 80s, I wasn't drunk, I was just sipping on a beer, so I was surprised I got pulled over. He's like, you can't do that. I'm like, in New Jersey. I'm like, I live in Louisiana, I'm sorry. He said, well, I got to give you a ticket for that. And he said, well, he spelled the marijuana. He says, you got any marijuana? Or he said, you got anything else you want to tell me about? And I figured, well, he's going to search the car anyway. I said, yes, sir, I got a small amount of marijuana under my seat, and of course, boom, he hooked me right up and locked me up, put the cuffs on me. Then he pulled the Sheik out of the car, and the Sheik had 3 grams of cocaine. So it was a huge arrest. Sheik had to go in front of a judge and everything, but we still made the show that night. And after the show, we went home, and I called my wife. I said, to the hotel, I said, we got arrested, but I don't think anybody knows. She calls me the next day. She goes, everybody knows. So my first call to was my dad, God bless him, and he chewed me out a little bit, but my family really rallied behind me. And my second call was to Vince McMahon, and never before have I gotten through so quickly with Vince. And Vince, I remember verbatim, he goes, Jim, what have you done to us? And I said, Vince, I'm embarrassed and ashamed, and whatever you do, I understand. And he says, well, turn in your tickets and go home, because we used to have a big stack of airplane tickets. And he canned me. It looked like it was the end of my career at WWF or E at that time. And my buddy Jake, the Snake, tried to schmooze it over, but he called me. He says, you're screwed. And so I was like, well, that's when I called Dusty down at WCW. I set a meeting up to go down and see Dusty. And before I got there, WWE called me back up and said, just lay low, we're going to bring you home, or bring you back. But I never regained the big push I was getting. They always kept me kind of strong, but they never put the heavy gas on me. So it was really hamstringed my career.
Do you think you may have had like an Ultimate Warrior style push if that incident hadn't occurred?
Well, I don't know about Ultimate Warrior style push, but I think they were kind of grooming me for a championship for a while. Who knows which one, but especially in the beginning when I first came up, that people were with me. WrestleMania 3, I had a big part in it. I mean, I actually went from the penthouse to the shit house on one deal, and I was lucky to survive that arrest. I think that would have killed a lot of guys' careers.
And I just brought up the Ultimate Warrior. Did you ever ride with him or get along with him outside?
Not too much with the Warrior. The Warrior wasn't a very personable guy. He was a great wrestler, obviously a great family man, but we just didn't interact. He didn't get along. He was one of those guys that he wanted his own private dressing room, which I always thought was a penalty. You're in your dressing room all by yourself. Everybody else is in the big room playing cards, joking around, having fun, and you're a big shot in the dressing room. So Me and the Warrior just, we were congenial to each other. There was no open hostility, but we weren't friends.
Okay. And you ended up winning the very first Royal Rumble. So how did that come about? And are you shocked that the Royal Rumble has gone on to become one of the WWE marquee events?
Yeah, well, back in the day that we were running the day after day, I went 54 days straight without a day off. So we did the Royal Rumble, boom, it was a great show, and I knew it was a big push for me, a big feather in my cap, but the next day was another show, so we loaded up and went to the, but I don't think anybody realized that the Royal Rumble would become one of the top 4 pay-per-views, or that WWE would become the huge worldwide powerhouse that it is, I always joke with the NFL guys in Major League Baseball. I'm like, world champions. Where in the world have you guys been? In my 36 years wrestling, I've wrestled in every state in the Union, every province in Canada, in 30 different countries. It's amazing to the appeal of professional wrestling around the world.
And you ended up being called back for a recent Royal Rumble. Was that a good experience for you?
And actually, I even came back because WWF was my heyday, but I was on a talent contract with WWE for a few years, where I wrestled with Super Crazy and myself were tag team partners. Me and Eugene were tag team partners, so I wrestled the Spirit Squad and the Highlanders and guys like that. That's my old joke. In the WWF, I wrestled DiBiase, Orton, and Dusty. In WWE, I wrestled Dusty's kid, Orton's kid, and DiBiase's kid. So first I beat up the old man, then I beat up the kid. But it was one of my things I'm most proud about, that late in my career to still be on a talent contract at WWE. That was exciting. But even after I was off the talent contract just a few years ago, they brought me back for the Royal Rumble. And of course, any rub with the companies is very exciting. I was just down at WrestleMania, and to come out and still be remembered all these years later, it's humbling.
What's the difference between the 1980s WWE dressing room and the recent WWE dressing room? Obviously, less partying going on among the wrestlers.
Not nearly the drugs. Drugs were very rampant back. It was the 80s, and people try to compare you to a sports team. I said, no, especially in the 80s, we were more like a rock and roll band than you were a sports team. You see guys sleeping under the tables after being up all night, sneaking girls into the dressing room, stuff like that. Now it's much more professional. The kids come in, they got their laptops or their cell phones, and they're all in suits. The drug problems out there, they have much more stringent drug testing now, and the kids are more professional, maybe even more athletic, but I don't think they have the characters that the WWF days had.
And you had a big feud with Harley Race, who's a huge legend. What's your memories of that feud?
Harley's another guy that taught me quite a bit. Like you said, Harley Race, how many times world champion back in the day, and to work with Harley, he was the king of wrestling. And, at the Slammy Awards, we had one of the biggest fights ever at the first ever Slammy Awards, where he pushed me off stage. We fought all through Trump Plaza, all through the dressing room, through the girls' dressing room, through the kitchen, into a bunch of animals. And Harley, we're fighting through all these animals. There's goats and chickens, ducks, camels, donkeys. Harley picks a chicken up by the head and starts beating me with a chicken, killed a chicken. Oh, it was such a big deal that Harley killed that chicken during the shoot. Of course, we had fried chicken for lunch, but who...
Why does everyone say Harley's so tough? He's just a respected guy that you wouldn't want to mess with, or...
Well, back in the day, wrestling was a much tougher, rougher business, and, Harley always used to carry a couple pistols with him. I mean, it was, because the fans, that was before sports entertainment. If you were a bad guy, they hated you, and they would come after you. And, guys had been ambushed over the years. Skandar Akbar got attacked in a bar on a planned ambush. So, Harley just his coming up through the hard days of the business, just respected by my generation of guys.
And there's a story that after Harley had to leave the WWE due to medical issues, that the Honky Tonk Man said some words, and Dynamite Kid threatened the Honky Tonk Man. Did that actually happen?
I don't know, to tell you the truth, but I know Honky Tonk says a lot of stuff, and he blasts everybody. He seems to be a bitter guy. I don't know why. He's had a great career, but he seems one of those guys that are just unhappy with life.
And you had a feud with Andre the Giant, who's a wrestling legend. What was that like?
Of course, wrestling Andre was a thrill of a lifetime. The biggest thrill of my career, though folks remember the Royal Rumble, but as a young guy, my dad would take me to Madison Square Garden to watch the NIT college basketball. So to pull up as an adult in front of Madison Square Garden and see your name on the marquee versus Andre the Giant, I mean, it was a double whammy, over 20,000 people in the Garden, and it was something I'll always remember. But you know, back in the day when I was the convict working in Hawaii, years and years earlier, all the top WWF stars would go to Japan, but on the way back they would stop in Hawaii and work for Peter Maivia. So I got to wrestle Andre as a very young guy with a convict mask on, and he remembered that all those years later and enjoyed work with me, I think.
And I've heard he's very temperamental. Did you get along well with him?
I got along okay with Andre. He could be an irritable giant, but you know, it was a lonely life for a guy like that. I mean, even Hulk Hogan can disguise himself. No matter where Andre goes, people are like, oh, and, you know, he has trouble fitting on the airplanes, has trouble getting into cars. It was a tough life. So, yeah, if you got him on a bad mood, it was going to be a rough day at the office.
You mentioned in your comedy show that he would step on Jake's hair and pull his arms and stuff like that. Did he get along with Jake? Or
yeah,
was
he got along good with Jake. He was pretty personal. He did get along with Bam Bam Bigelow. He didn't like Bam Bam for some reason. He actually chased Bammer out of the ring, where he took the bump, rolled out of the ring, went back to the dressing room, got his gear, and left. He didn't like Big John Studd. You know, there's certain people that he just didn't like. Bad News Brown, they didn't get along.
And you feuded with Bad News Brown, speaking of Bad News
Yeah,
Brown.
worked with Bad News at WrestleMania. Yeah.
What was your memories of that?
Well, we had a great match at WrestleMania, man. Boom, we hit each other. He had a chair, I had a 2x4. We fought like cats and dogs. But a third of the way through the show, I had this big snot thing come up my nose and hangs down to my waist. And it just like stayed there the whole match. And it's flying around. So we get done and come back through the curtain. All anybody talks about is, Duggan, you had this thing hanging out of your nose. We're like, yeah, but how about the match? Even the fans are like, hey, remember that? Yeah, that. So as long as they remember something.
And Bret Hart did a lot of bashing of Bad News Brown in his book, saying he was difficult to work with and stiff. When we talked to Jake, Jake said the opposite, that he was very easy to work with. What was your
Yeah, I
thoughts
got
on
along
that?
okay with Bad News. I mean, you know, of course, Bret and Calgary might have a much bigger history with Bad News than I did, but the little bit I worked with them, yeah, we got along well and had good matches.
And you also had a feud with Dino Bravo. What are your memories of that?
Yeah, Dino, the world's strongest man. I tell you, I enjoyed working with Dino, especially back in the day. Even Toronto, Winnipeg, anywhere else, everybody would have the U.S. flag. They'd give me the USA chant. I'd show up in Montreal with Dino. They'd boo the hell out of me, you know. But I had good times with Dino. Him, Frenchie Martin was his manager for a while, and then Jimmy Hart. But I enjoyed working with Dino because our styles were, you know, similar. We were brawlers more than wrestlers.
Were you saddened when you heard about the way he was killed, kind of execution style?
Sure, you know, just on his passing, but to be murdered, I guess the story I heard was he had murdered at home in his easy chair. I mean, obviously something more was going on than just wrestling with Dino.
Because I guess he had tried to make a comeback not too long before that with WWE, but I guess it wasn't going so well.
Well, that's what a lot of folks don't realize, how competitive the WWE is. You know, I tell folks there's 1,500 NFL football players, probably 1,000 NHL hockey players. There's 100 WWE wrestlers. It's television. It's more competitive than sports.
And you talked about Haku before. You ended up becoming King Duggan when you beat King Haku, who had replaced Harley Race as the king.
Right.
What's your memories of being King Duggan? Did you like that gimmick, or were you kind of upset when you thought you were going to have to?
Well, no, I really wasn't upset because my character started to go more comical as time went on, you know, and when I was the king of wrestling, I had the cape, the crown, the flag, the board, the thumb, the tongue, the hole, and the crossed eyes. I was like Gimmick City out there, and Bobby Heenan always used to say, you know, Vince, Duggan needs an eagle. Get Duggan an eagle. I'm like, Bobby, shut up. He'll do that as a rib, you know, but I enjoyed, so of course, you know, when I got Harley's cape and crown, that his crown is like a bushel basket. It sit on my head like that. And then when Macho beat me, you know, they gave Macho a brand new crown and cape and whatever you call it, Spectre or Spencer, whatever. Yeah, Macho made a good king, though.
Did you get along well with Macho Man?
Yeah, I sure did. I got along good with Macho, and I got along well with Liz. Our wives were friends since Sherry, because we all used to travel. Sherry, Liz, and Deborah, my wife, would all become buddies. So I knew Mach through that. But Mach, we weren't like close buddies, but we were friends, yeah.
He was very protective of Elizabeth.
Very protective of Liz, very much, almost smothered her. But Liz seemed to be attracted to those type of guys, and they had a great relationship until, the end. And of course, Liz broke Macho's heart. But it went full circle, because then after a few years, Liz wanted to come back, but Macho wouldn't have her.
And as far as the matches went with him, was he an easy guy to work with?
He was one of the good guys to work with, because he not only brawled, but he could fly too. When he had Scary Sherry as a manager. So yeah, I enjoyed working with Macho. And plus, Macho's one of the top guys in the company. So if you're working with Macho, if you're not main event, you're semi.
Did you ever work with his brother in the wrestling ring?
Lanny?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, a little bit. Like I said, there's only a few of us, so we all work with each other and know each other. But yeah, I knew Lanny even down in Mid-South. He was down there, so yeah.
And you feuded with Rick Rude as well. What are your memories of that?
Well, I can remember when they first started doing the Ravishing Rick Rude deal, and he was really self-conscious at first. But then I tell you, the guy got into it and would drive the women crazy. I mean, but I remember he had like a waist of a wasp. He had a big chest, and you could almost put your arms around his waist. He was but a great athlete, and drove the women wild with that Ravishing deal.
Now, some people have said that his death was an intentional overdose due to some medical stuff that went wrong. Did you hear any of that?
I heard a little bit about that, but like I said, Rick and I weren't real tight. So there's, again, wrestling room has 15 rumors for everything that's going on. But yeah, I heard that he had tried to commit suicide prior to it, and then tried it again, I guess. But I would just be speculating.
And you feuded with Sergeant Slaughter when Slaughter was really hot as a heel, doing the Iraqi supporter gimmick.
Right.
What was that like?
It was great. Well, I worked with Sarge as a really young guy, as Big Jim Duggan, so I've known Sarge for many, many years. And, he, again, a ring general, you learn this, he always try to get you to slow down, because it's just human nature. You're in front of all these people, you're on TV, you want to go fast. Sarge was like, slow down, let him enjoy the match, take your time. And he was a great ring general, but that was a huge angle for him to turn to Iraq during the Iraqi war.
And you ended up teaming with him. What did you think of that tag team?
Well, I thought they were going to push that tag team a little bit. There's the old rumor, nothing's done until it's done, because supposedly when I got on a plane in Florida and was flying up to TV, me and Sarge were going to be tag team champions. By the time I got to TV and got to the building, it had changed to the Legion of Doom becoming tag team champions. So I thought that was a good tag team, and yeah. But I enjoy singles more than being in a tag myself.
And you wrestled the Nasty Boys quite a few times.
Yeah.
What are your memories of them? I know you told a funny story last night about that.
Yeah. Well, I traveled a lot with the Nasty Boys. I mean, and those guys, a lot of guys are bullies in our business, and we'll pick out the youngest, newest guy in the company. Knobs and Sags will pick with the youngest, newest guy in the company, and then they'll go mess with Hogan and Flair. They're equal opportunity. They mess with everybody, so you got to respect that. And they're fun to travel with, and they had a great little run with the Pity City deal and all that. And who knows if they'll ever get in the Hall of Fame, but I enjoy travel. They were a lot of fun to travel with, that's for sure. As long as you weren't the object of their attack.
Were you there for the incident with the Nasty Boys and Flair in the bar or something where Flair
in New York City, they tore his clothes off and everything? Yeah, I think that was at one of the top clubs in New York City, and they tore all of Rick's clothes off. I mean, they were just crazy. They still are. I just saw them at WrestleMania, and they're still having fun and enjoying life. I just wish Knobsy would take a little bit better care of himself. He looks a little rough.
Now, you had a big incident with Yokozuna that really helped get Yokozuna over as a heel, where he bonsai dropped you and severely injured you. What's your memories of that?
Well, again, I got along real good with Yoko, and we had some good matches. I was the only guy ever to knock him off his feet. But the deal was he'd do that bonsai drop. But the one time, well, he did it to me a few times over the career. But the one he hurt me was Mr. Fuji put the flag over me, the Japanese flag, and Yoko missed and cracked 2 of my ribs.
Oh, so that was the legitimate there when you
Yeah, that was
switched
that's the old joke. People say, I saw you throw a punch, you missed a guy by that much. I said, yeah, did you see when I hit him by that much, though? And Yoko just missed. It wasn't intentional, it wasn't malicious, it was just a...
You never really had a huge payoff match after that. Do you think they could have done more with the feud when you came back?
Yeah, I think so, but I think after the arrest with the Sheik, they never really gave me the big push. But it's, like I said, it's been a good business for me. The guys that come in, they start buying Mercedes-Benz and Rolex watches and diamond earrings and all that stuff. I saved my money. I drive a Ford. I don't wear a Rolex. I put 2 daughters through school. It's what you do personally. You got to take personal responsibility.
And a lot of people don't remember you actually had a feud with Shawn Michaels when he was a heel. What are your memories of that feud, and was that before he developed his attitude problems?
Well, I think Shawn is one of the best ever, and tell you a great baby face, because he gets that sympathy. You get everybody, and everybody's pulling for Shawn. He's great as a heel because you can beat the hell out of him. You get the whole crowd, come on, Shawn, come on. But Shawn and I, we never really hung together. He was, my buddies with Dr. Death, Steve Williams, and Terry Gordy and guys like that. And Shawn knows Triple H and Stone Cold. So 2 different groups. But as a talent, he's a great talent. Personally, and now he's a reborn Christian, so that's a deal. But we just didn't really hang with each other.
But the matches were good?
Matches were good. Yeah, I like, because Shawn's very, very good. I think, Shawn can have a match with a broomstick, as the saying goes.
And you were one of the main guys that jumped to WCW, that helped give WCW a lot of credibility when Hogan went over. What led to you jumping ship?
Well, I went with Hulkster. Hulkster's been a friend of mine for 30 plus years, and the guy's a good guy. He just gets more bad press than anybody I know. But there was no cut contracts. That was the bottom line. This is the way I feed my family. And, with Vince, if you work, you got paid. If you didn't work, you didn't get paid. And so I made the move down to WCW, and boom, came down there. And my first month down there, I beat Stunning Steve Austin so bad he had to shave his head and change his name to Stone Cold. I should get a kickback all the money he's making now.
Yeah, you did have a feud with Austin, I believe. After that, you started by kind of squashing him on the pay-per-view, and you had a little bit of a feud. At that time, did you have any inkling that he would go on to be a superstar?
No, I don't think anybody saw that coming. From Stunning Steve to Stone Cold, that whole character change, and again, probably one of the top 5 guys ever in the business. But personally, we didn't really get along.
And you brought up Hulk Hogan. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on his big lawsuit victory recently.
Well, it's good. It's great because they took advantage of the guy. I mean, I guess it was the tape. And of course, I talked to Hulkster just last week or so on the phone, and he was like, yes, no, yes. He says, Hacker, I'm afraid to talk. Everybody's taping me. I said, I can understand. He's a big target. He's just, all anybody sees is money signs, especially now that he won the lawsuit. But I'll tell you, years ago, I opened a gym in Florida, and everybody was working all the time, but he took one of his few days off. Him, Macho Man, Beefer, the Nasty Boys all came across all this whole state of Florida to open a gym for me. So that's something I'll always remember.
And you brought up Brutus Beefcake there. Everyone, a lot of the times, talks negatively about him. We've always got along with him well in Great North Wrestling. What are your thoughts on Brutus?
Yeah, I got along with Beefer too. I mean, he's a different kind of guy, but the whole dressing room is different kind of guys. I was sitting, I was actually with Beefcake at a Comic-Con, and he goes, look at those people over there. And I look over, there's a couple of people looking at us going, look at those people over there pointing at us. So, we are kind of all a strange group of characters. But Beefer's his own guy, but I've always got along with Beef.
And you feuded with Vader and had a big match with Vader at Starrcade in WCW. He was known for roughing people up pretty bad. What were those matches like with him?
Those were pretty physical matches, back then, I wasn't no wallflower back in the day, brothers. And Vader, if you let him eat you up, he was like Brody or Andre. If you don't fight him back, he'll eat you up and just crush you. So yeah, you got to fight back. And me and Vader, we had a fight.
I guess you weren't around for the incident with him and Paul Orndorff?
Nope, I was actually there for that also.
Oh.
Yeah, down at WCW.
What exactly happened there?
Well, they were having an argument about showing up for doing an interview or something. Anyway, I wasn't actually in the room when it went down, but there's 2 or 3 different stories, of course, again. But obviously, Vader took a swing at Orndorff, missed, slipped, fell down, went down. Orton put the boots to him a little bit, Orndorff. And, I think Vader was more embarrassed than hurt, but he definitely got the short end of that stick.
And you did wrestle Kamala quite a few times in WWE, but you had some pay-per-view matches with him in WCW. What are your thoughts on him?
Well, Kamala's one of the last of the guys that was scare kids when they comes to the ring, Even now, the top heel comes to the ring, the kids run to the barricade. Hey! Man, they used to play that Kamala music. He'd come down with that mask, whacking his belly. Then people would run away from the barricade. So right off the bat, that gives you a bonus because you got somebody in the ring with you that people believe.
Have you seen him recently since his late?
Saw him in New Orleans at WrestleMania at New Orleans. He has lost both his legs. He wrote a really nice book, and he's struggling.
And you feuded with Big Bubba Rogers, who is the Big Boss Man. What are your memories of that feud, and what do you think of him being inducted into the Hall of Fame?
I think that's great. Big Boss got put in the Hall of Fame. There's a guy that embraced his gimmick and made it work. I mean, I wrestled Boss a lot. And again, we were both big guys, so it wasn't a whole lot of flying. It was, I think, believable matches, and that's why it worked.
And you also feuded with Diamond Dallas Page before he became a superstar in WCW, back when he had the Diamond Dolls with him and such.
Right.
What are your memories of that feud, and do you still get along with him today?
Yeah, I get along still with DDP. He saved Jake the Snake Roberts' life. I really believe that. Jake and I were best friends for many years. Jake got hooked on drugs. I didn't talk to him for probably 10, 12 years. He went to 2 or 3 different high-priced rehabs. They couldn't clean him out. He went down to DDP. DDP changed his life, man. I saw Jake last year at WrestleMania and just last week at WrestleMania in Dallas. And I said, Jake, it's good to see you back, buddy.
And really, unfortunately, you had kidney cancer. Do you want to just tell us how you found out about that? That was in your WCW time.
Sure.
And how you overcame it.
Well, it was a terrifying ordeal, actually. I was passing blood, and my wife's like, well, you got to go to the doctor. I'm like, nah, I just took a bad bump in the ring. She's like, go to the doctor. And I went to the doctor. I knew the doctor, so I'm joking with him. I'm flirting with the nurses, and he comes in, he goes, Jim, it's cancer. It was terrifying. It was devastating. My girls were young girls at that time, 4 and 5, and I just sat in their room, cried and prayed for till my surgery, because I didn't care about coming back to wrestling or anything like that. All I really wanted to do was survive, so I would be able to grow up with my daughters. And with the grace of God and early detection, not only did they save my life, but I had kidney cancer. They cut it all out of me, but I was able to go back to the profession I love.
So you overcame it just by having it cut out, so you didn't have to undergo chemotherapy or anything?
The early detection saved my life, and that's why I do a lot of work with the Cancer Society folks, because like everybody, I was afraid to go to the doctor, but boom, you go, if something's wrong, get to the doctor, get it checked out, and they can save your life.
Were you still under contract the entire time during that period, or did they cut you and then bring you back?
WCW, if anything, they were a really stepped up company, and they paid the whole time. And even after the company went under, I was still on contract for almost 7 months, and it was work pay best year of my life because I didn't work too much.
And shortly after you came back, you gave a great emotional speech, and you went from that to getting a janitor gimmick, which was actually popular. But what were your thoughts on being given that janitor gimmick, and who came up with that?
Well, when I came back, Terry Taylor's the one that had me come out on television. I'm like, I don't want to talk to anybody. He says, Jim, you got to share this with the people. You got to share it with. And I'm glad I did, because it was long before computers and emails and all that. But I got thousands of goodwill cards, thousands of letters of support, and that made it all possible. But when I came back, I didn't get along with Vince Russo. And I think what Vince Russo wanted to do was push me out of my contract. He wanted me to quit to free up some money for some of the younger guys. And of course, I wasn't going to quit, so they said, we're going to make you the janitor of the WCW, and you got to wear a janitor suit. I'm like, oh, that's great, man. Make it work. And we made the little angle work for a while.
What did you think of Vince Russo, the amount they paid him to come in, and basically he ended up killing the company?
Yeah, I'm not a big Vince Russo fan, not only, he tries to take credit for what happened with WWF evolution into WWE. There's only one Vince that can take credit for that, and that's Vince McMahon, not Vince Russo. But anyway, they brought him in, and they thought but the guy made himself world champion. Right off the bat, there's a little bit of an ego problem there. If you're the booker and you're making yourself world champion, and David Arquette, some poor decisions. But the bottom line is that was the company I was going to stay with, because Jimmy Hart and I used to talk. It's like being under the Titanic. The ship's going down, but you want to stay on it as long as possible.
And you're probably the highest paid janitor in the world. And you ended up becoming a member of Lance Storm's Team Canada in an angle that, well, I guess Team Canada had a bit of heat, but you were never really accepted in that gimmick. What are your thoughts on being given that gimmick and working with Lance Storm?
Well, that was another deal that they, called me back up. The janitor deal's getting over. They'd fly back up to Atlanta and other big meetings, like, we're going to turn you against America. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Iraq, Iran, where are we going to go with this? And they're going to be part of Team Canada, which had major guns at the time, so that wasn't so bad after all, But in Lance Storm, one of the greatest technical wrestlers in the sport, but Lance was kind of vanilla back in the day, and he would be on the microphone. I think he used to say, "Can I please have everyone's attention?" And I'm behind him being Hacksaw, screaming and yelling. So they call me up in the office and they're like, "Hacksaw, can you turn your stuff down a little bit? We're trying to push the kid." I'm like, turn my stuff down. Tell the kid to turn his stuff up. This is the big leagues. But Lance, we had a decent little run, but again, that was the Titanic days. The ship was going under, and I just put up with it and lived through it.
So were you doing that gimmick when they went under?
Yeah, I think I just finished. I was right into that.
What are your memories of it going under, and are you surprised Vince bought it? And did you basically find out that night on Nitro like everyone else?
Yeah, at that point I wasn't working that much. They were just sending me my checks because they didn't they told me to cut down on the Hogan and they just didn't like my character, but I was still on contract. So, but you could see the end was coming. There was no question. Now Vince buying it, I don't know if anybody saw that coming.
Do you think they could have got more for the company, considering the whole video library was?
Yeah, they got a great library. But that's good for us guys that were at WCW, at Mid-South, at Georgia Championship Wrestling, because now Vince has those libraries, and it's exposing us to a whole new generation of kids that wouldn't see us without the WWE Network.
And I'm guessing you probably had a lot of contact with Ric Flair over the years between WWE and WCW. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I get along with Rick. The only time I've been in the ring for an hour time limit draw was wrestling Rick for a few times, because he was the NWA champion. I was the local Mid-South champion, so he couldn't beat me. I couldn't beat him. So we'd go the 1 hour time limit draws, and I tell you, that's a long time in the ring. But you need a guy like Ric Flair in there. And even I was pretty established at that time, but still, to go an hour, that's a whole new skill set, and I learned a lot from Rick.
Is he really the same type of person outside of the ring as he is?
Yeah, pretty much. Rick is Rick, and what you see is what you get. And I get along good with Rick, and it's great to see his daughters doing so well.
So after WCW, I guess you collected your checks while they still came in, and then You made some appearances for TNA. What are your thoughts on those appearances?
Well, the TNA thing, we just kind of feeling each other out, and it just didn't seem to work for me. Dixie Carter and I just didn't work well, and it just wasn't the place for me to be. Even though Hogan was down there, the Nasty Boys were down there, it just wasn't a good mix for me. And of course, there's a huge independent circuit, not only here in North America, but around the world. So I enjoyed just bouncing around doing the indies.
Are you surprised TNA's still in business after kind of being just barely holding on after all these
For
years?
so long, they lost a lot of money, but I think what they're trying to do is trying to compete with the WWE. Nobody's going to compete with the WWE, but for every Hertz, there's an Avis. There's room for a number two. There's room for an alternative, and they should have stuck with their own type of program and their own type of show and not try to compete with Vince, but just offer the fans an alternative to the WWE.
And I understand that you still work for Global Force Wrestling and Jeff Jarrett. What are your thoughts on Jeff Jarrett and that Global Force Wrestling company? Do you think it has a future?
Yeah, and in the beginning, Jeff and I didn't really get along too well, but we got to know each other over the years. We've done a few Comic-Cons together and stuff like that, and we became friends. So yeah, I'm not like on contract with the Global Force, but when it's advantageous for both of us to work together, we do. I think it's great. The more places for talent to work, the better. It's the more companies, the better. Because there's a lot of great wrestling talent out there. There's just not room for them in the WWE.
Do you think they're going to get a TV deal?
Well, the way TNA is dropping the ball, I think the TVs are looking for somebody to take over for TNA.
And you ended up appearing recently on WWE Legends House. Do you want to tell us about that experience?
Yeah, that was really a lot of fun. I mean, it was 5 weeks out in Palm Springs, California at Harpo Marx's mansion. Of course, when I got there, they said, "You're rooming with Roddy Piper." And I didn't know Pipe, and so for the first 2 days, we just kind of eyeballed each other. But then we hit it off to the point where the fans called it the bromance, and we became best friends. Our families became friends, our wives, our daughters, and that was the good part about it. Of course, the bad part, Tony Atlas and I had a few high spots where we almost had a fist fight 2 different times. And, Tony and I haven't really got along in 30 years, but we never had to live together. And they stuck us all together. And Tony, he had trouble with everybody in the house. And as I always say, I can understand having trouble with me and Piper. We're a pain in the ass too. But how in the world do you have trouble with Hillbilly Jim? I mean, the guy's like a Buddhist monk. He meditates, he does yoga. I mean, and Tony had trouble with Jimmy Hart, Hillbilly Jim, Pat. He had trouble with everybody in the house. But looking back at it, it kind of added to the show because the show would have been too smooth. Tony was kind of the fly in the ointment.
What was your favorite memory of that whole experience?
Oh, geez, there was so many of them. I mean, we did the first show of Legend House. They did probably 15, 20 minutes of me and Piper just trying to get a blender to work. I mean, just some of the most simple, funniest things. But I think what I enjoyed most, it was like, a lot of guys like, oh, it's a long time. It was a long time away from home and your family and friends. But, everybody else would be going to bed, Hillbilly and Jimmy, Pat and Gene, Tony. And me and Piper be in bed. It was like summer camp. We're in there talking, giggling like kids, man. I enjoyed getting to know the man.
Now, we've done quite a few interviews with superstar Billy Graham for this channel, so I just wanted to ask you if you could give your opinion on Billy Graham, and he recently was put back under Legends contract. So,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, last year.
Yeah, I know Superstar pretty well, man. I remember back when I first came into the WWF, he was having horrific hip problems. I mean, his hip was killing me. Lay on the seat of the airplane, put his feet up in the air. I mean, he was hurting, but of course then he had a huge falling out with WW, and I didn't know that you just told me that he patched things up. But yeah, I get along good with Soup. We see him once in a while at the Comic-Cons.
And recently there was a lot of stuff being talked about on the internet, I guess in 2015, where you had mentioned something about Brock Lesnar really hurts people. Oh. Do you recall saying anything about that?
Well, I think, not really tell you the truth what I'd say. Yeah. I know Brock is very physical with guys, and he does hurt people. And I think the Steiners brothers, they were really rough with the guys doing the jobs and stuff, and would hurt people. Now, you know, it is a physical business, but also you got to take care of each other too. And I think that's why you have such an injury problem now. Guys are just trying these outlandish moves that would hurt anybody, and also you have guys out there being reckless with your opponent, their opponent. You know, and if back in the day, if we were wrestling together, if you get hurt, that would kill the angle. If I got hurt, that would kill the angle. So you'd have to take care of me, and I'd have to take care of you. Now it just seems a little more reckless than the old days.
And are you still under WWE Legends contract?
No, I haven't been on a Legends contract for probably almost 4 years now. Yeah, it's nice to be on a Legends contract, of course, but it's pretty constricting on what you can do. And you know, I had a nice run on it. People were like, oh, they pulled you off the Legends contract, those sons of a gun. I said, well, I was on it for 3 years. You know, I can't gripe at all. It was money for nothing for 3 years. But I still, you know, do occasionally, like I said, WrestleMania, we're down there for fan access, Hall of Fame, WrestleMania. So they still use us quite a bit, the guys that aren't on Legends contract. But a lot of guys are.
Do you still follow the product? Obviously, they still bring you in here and there for...
Yeah, I always joke. I said, no, I don't watch too much wrestling anymore. I said, that'd be like a butcher watching him cut meat on his day off. You know, after 36 years when I'm at home, I don't really like to watch wrestling.
What do you think the future holds for the wrestling business now that the territories have dried up?
Well, I think it's going to kind of revert back to the old ways because the smaller territories are getting stronger and getting better talent, getting better organized. And the big company, WWE, does not hit a lot of the cities. I mean, they go to the West Coast, the East Coast, maybe Chicago, you know, maybe Toronto, but you're not hitting Hamilton or Cornwall or towns like that. And that's where, you know, people love wrestling. They want to come to a wrestling show, but the WWE is nowhere near them. So I think the indies are going to start coming up and being stronger.
And what's your best advice for a young wrestler trying to make it in the business?
Get golf clubs. That's where the money's at. A lot easier on the body. No, I tell folks, because I get that a lot. Young guy come up like, hey, I want to be a wrestler. So that's my joke, you know, get golf clubs. But I say, take a look at Daniel Bryan. You look at Daniel Bryan, when I first saw that guy, I said, there's no way in the world this kid's going to make it. Not a chance. But there's a guy who had the work ethic, the drive, the desire to become a wrestler, and he made it work. So I tell the young guys, chase your dreams. Remember, the odds are going to be against you, but chase your dreams, because every once in a while you get a hold of that brass ring, like Daniel Bryan.
What do you think of the career-ending neck injury of Daniel Bryan that he had recently?
Well, that's what we were talking about earlier. A lot of high-risk moves, high-danger moves. Guys are being reckless with each other, reckless with their own bodies. And, you know, injuries were a problem in my day. I've had 10 overall surgeries. I mean, it's a physical business. People are going to get hurt. But, I mean, you know, in our day, you'd save that big high-fly, triple-dipple move for WrestleMania or for, you know, a pay-per-view. Now every night's a TV show, so every night those guys are, you know, stretching the limit as far as they can go. So injuries are going to be a problem.
What's your overall view of Vince McMahon after working for him and knowing him for so many years?
I respect Vince McMahon. You know, you know, he's older than me, and he's out there getting hit with chairs, hitting people with chairs back in the day. And I just did a talk show recently in Atlanta with a young guy. He's like, that Vince McMahon, he treats us like pieces of meat. I said, well, kid, what the hell you think you are, buddy? If you want a friend, go buy a puppy. You know, Vince is not your friend, he's your boss. And, you know, I've never been to Vince's house. You know, I don't know him socially. Guys like Shawn and Stone Cold do. That's, you know, the office type guys. That just is not my deal. He was my boss. He treated me fair. I could treat you fair, yes, of course. But, you know, to make it in my profession, I've been wrestling 36 years. All anybody really remembers is those WWF days, you know. So I'm still living off that career with WWF, and Vince McMahon made that all possible.
What do you think of Triple H, who seems to be slowly taking over a lot of Vince's responsibility?
Well, Triple H, you know, I don't really know him that well, you know, because I came down to, you know, WCW. He was Hunter Hearst Helmsley, and you know, he came up there, and so I didn't have that, you know, but he seems to, you know, Shawn, Triple H, Stone Cold, and that's their kind of group of guys. Like I said, mine are, you know, Gordy, Doc, and Piper.
And the last person I'll ask you about is Eric Bischoff. He's a controversial figure, but obviously he probably helped make sure your family was very well taken care of.
Yeah, Eric, Yeah, especially in the beginning, he was great in the early days of WCW. But as success started growing, I think more money started coming in. You know, he made decisions, and if you're going to be a leader, you got to make decisions. But I mean, paying a guy like, Tank Abbott $500,000, or Steve McMichaels, who was a great football player, but not a top hand wrestler. They were just throwing money away at those guys, where guys like King Kong Bundy never got a run at WCW.
And then there was that Master T angle where I understand he was paying like Master T's bodyguards $400,000 a year.
They're throwing money away. It was crazy. Ernest the Cat Miller, I mean, huge contracts for guys that, are flash in the pans.
Oh, did you get along well with Curt Hennig?
Yeah, I got along good with Curt. Yeah, I sure did. Mr. Perfect. I traveled with Curt a little bit. Yeah, and he was fun. He was always a fun guy on the road, and that was a perfect gimmick for him, because he'd be sitting here going, "I'm going to throw that in the trash can," and be and it'd go in. I mean, the guy was a great gimmick for Curt, and he had the look. Reminded me like Dolph Ziggler a little bit. The curly hair, a lot of white teeth, good looking, good body. And I was another shame to lose Curt.
Did you ever work with Kurt's son when you were in WWE?
I don't know. I worked with, I think I have, but not like in a battle royal or something. I worked Teddy's kid, DiBiase's kid, and Morton's kid, and Dusty's boy. But I don't know if I worked with Kurt's kid. I saw him at WrestleMania, had a nice talk with him.
And all of our fans always like to know wrestlers' opinion on the Montreal screw job, so I'm just going to throw that out there. What did you think of that whole situation?
With Brett, and Brett's a good friend of mine. I've stayed at Brett's house in Calgary. He stayed at my house in the States. We were friends, but I disagree with Brett there. Brett's like, "Well, I didn't want to lose the belt in Canada. I don't want to lose in Canada." Well, I'm like, "Well, I don't want to lose in America, Brett. That's part of the job description." And they knew he was going to WCW, but it worked out great for Brett. He was one of the first $1 million babies to go down to WCW. So, and people are still talking about the screw job. So it worked out good for Brett. But I disagree with what he did, but it worked out good for him. So good for you, Brett.
Are you surprised that he really never did anything in WCW? Not many people can even remember one match he had there. Do you think WCW kind of blew it when they paid him?
I believe he got hurt. I think I said that Goldberg hit him with a chair, I think, and hurt his neck or something. So yeah, he was, and that's the thing with WCW. Guys were on no-cut contracts, so people were going down with like a sprained ankle or a twisted finger. I mean, and missing 3 weeks of work. That was one of the bad things about the no-cut contract.
What did you think of Goldberg? Because he played for the Falcons. I think you were under the Falcons contract for a bit, and he was one of the big players in WCW. Lots of conflicting reports. Some people say he was a nice guy. Some people said he had attitude issues.
Yeah, everybody's an individual, but me and Bill actually got along because, again, that jock background, we talked football, we talked the Falcons, Neither one of us Falcon fans. They cut both of us. But yeah, I got along with Bill. I still, they did a show recently with Bill. He's doing appearances down in the States at Indian reservations and stuff.
Do you think they made a mistake ending the streak there?
Yeah, I sure do. That was the whole thing, was the streak with Goldberg, as was the streak with Taker at WrestleMania. I think you kill the streak, it takes away all the mystique. But that's why I'm not in the office.
Was that Kevin Nash's booking?
That's the thing. I wasn't ever an office guy. I would show up, I'd do my job and leave. Other guys would be in the office. What's happening? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? I'd come in, do my job, and hit the road. And
finally, is there anything you'd like to plug that you have coming up, or where we could follow you on social media?
Sure, yeah, of course. I'm on Twitter at official Hacksaw. www.hacksawduggan.com is my webpage. My book just came out, Hacksaw, the Jim Duggan story. Catchy title there. And of course, now I'm doing stand-up, and all those bookings can be found at hacksawshow.com.
Well, thank you very much. And is there anything you want to say to your fans closing out?
Well, thank you for all the years of support, folks. Like I said, it's humbling that my heyday was so long ago to come out and have people go, ho, ho, and still remember you. It's something that I've always loved. People say you get tired of it. I said, get tired of it. It's my life's blood. So, folks, this ho's for you. Ho!